Hello, today I want to address a topic that is known to a lot of people, but astoundingly is actually unknown to a majority of people. And I know this is from anecdotal information when I talk about this subject with friends and they express astonishment like regarding these facts. And it's something that, if you think about it, any logical person would actually see um, this situation, and that is the direct link between global international banks and uh, criminal cartel money, and the fact that these banks knowingly launder this dirty money, and the fact that almost all of the cash in the global international banking system consists of dirty money. Now, a lot of people, again, like I said, are shocked when they hear this, but if you just look at a few facts, you will realize this to be true if you're not totally naive in regard to this subject matter. When you think about it, okay, the U.S. government, they estimate that on the very low end, the gross proceeds from narcotics trafficking inside the United States, so we're not talking about even Mexican drug cartels, we're not talking about any of the Medellin or Cali cocaine cartels in Colombia. We're just talking drug trafficking inside the United States. The gross proceeds per year on the low end is about $80 billion a year. Okay, so where do you think this money is sitting? Do you think these drug lords are sitting on $80 billion in cash? Of course not. They have to invest it, and to invest it, they have to clean it. And to clean it, they have to launder it through the biggest banks in the world. They cannot launder this money through small community banks because it's going to draw a red flag. So they have to launder it through the biggest banks in the world, like Citigroup, HSBC, Wachovia, all three banks which have been outed for time and time and time again for laundering money for criminal cartels. And of course, they always deny knowing about it. But everyone on the inside that I've ever worked with, that I've ever heard with, you have big time New York bankers that retire that says everybody at the very top of these banks know about this. And they said not only do they know about this, they knowingly go after this dirty money because it's so profitable. And one New York banker said that these CEOs would sell their own mothers down the river to get this money. It's so profitable. And when you think about it, it all makes sense, because think about the case of Raul Salinas, who was the president of an ex-Mexican's brother, and you had a Citigroup, Citibank, private banker, Amy Elliott, that was the banker laundering all of Raul Salinas' dirty money. Now, this money numbered, his transactions started numbering in the 40 to 60 to 80 million, and then it went to 9 digits over $100 million of transactions. And yet, you know, when she testified, she said, oh, well, you want to ask the Rockefellers where their money's coming from, so why should I ask where this money's coming from? But that's a bunch of bull, because I've been in private banking, and I know the #1 rule in private banking is KYC, which stands for Know Your Client. So you have to understand where this money comes from. And then in testimony came out that Citigroup was the one that helped set up these shell corporations to launder this money through for Raul Salinas. And so they were the ones setting up all these fake shell corporations that they're laundering the money through. And Amy Elliott even testified. She said, look, I'm not the bad person here. I was given Raul Salinas' contact number by a colleague of mine. And she said everyone at the highest levels, which implied the CEO of Citigroup at the time, she said everyone at the highest levels knew about this. And she said, I'm just the fall guy. I'm just the one made to take the fall because no one at the top of Citigroup can take the fall for this. And I can also testify that in the mid-1990s, Citibank, the private banking group, was kicked out of Japan because Japanese government officials said that there was no way Citibank, private bank, did not know they were laundering money, knowingly laundering money for Yakuza at the time. So they were kicked out of the private bank. Citigroup was kicked out of Japan for 5 years and couldn't even reapply for reinstatement until 5 years. That's how egregious their greed for going after this criminal money. So people say, why do these big banks want this criminal money? Well, like I said before, obviously these cartels are investing this money. They need a way to clean the money. So it's a symbiotic, profitable relationship for everyone. I've heard that these banks will charge these crime syndicates about 40% to launder their money. I don't know if that's true, but that sounds, from various estimates, somewhere to be about accurate. Maybe on the low end, 30%, but anywhere from 30 to 40%. So think about it. If, one big crime syndicate is laundering $100 billion, there you go. That's $40 billion of profit to the bank right off the top. Now, these are all documentable facts that I'm relaying to you now. So you can even look it up on the internet. You can see the congressional testimony of these criminal cases against Citigroup, HSBC, Wachovia Bank. You can see the FBI testimony. You can see that there are internal leaked memos that were discovered in Citigroup when they understood the FBI was investigating the source of Raul Salinas' money that Citigroup was laundering for them. And then when they discovered it, you can see top brass of Citigroup discussed moving Salinas' money to another offshore haven to try to hide the money. In fact, there's all this evidence that top executives know about the stuff that's going on and knowingly pursue this money because it's so profitable. When we look at other sources, just look about how much money is involved in drug trafficking. And I'm just talking about drug trafficking, so I'm not even talking about organized crime syndicate money like mafia money, like the Yakuza in Japan or the triads in China or whatnot. So when we look at just like the amount of money and the amount of bribery that goes on, FBI documents said that probably in Mexico, government officials were given by drug cartels $150 million a month to look the other way, to facilitate drug trafficking. That's not $150 million a year. That's $150 million a month to look the other way. So think about what banks are receiving in regard to this. Now, there's also other books that you can read that have been written about this very subject matter. In fact, the former U.S. Customs agent Robert Mazur, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his last name, M-A-Z-U-R, he wrote a book called The Infiltrator, My Secret Life Inside the Dirty Banks Behind Pablo Escobar's Medellin Cartel. And he said in that book, quote unquote, the international community is today doing the same thing that BCCI Bank and their officers were doing 20 years ago. And he cited again the HSBC money laundering scandal that was recently exposed. And another person, James Henry, wrote this book called The Price of Offshore Revisited. And in that book, through various documents he gathered, he estimated that between 21 to 32 trillion, yeah, that's trillion, not billion, that's trillion with a T, 21 to 32 trillion dollars have been hidden in tax havens that operate basically as global money laundering centers facilitated by the biggest international banks in the world. So it's a complete joke when you think about it, when the U.S. is going after these wealthy people, individuals that are hiding money in tax shelters, tax havens in Switzerland, because we're talking about 21 to 32 trillion dollars of dirty money that banks are laundering through their operations, and yet like no government official wants to go after this money because it has to do with the bankers, and the bankers can't be touched. So, when we look at this subject, again, I think you have to be the most naive of naive people not to understand how dirty, how filthy dirty business like the banking industry can be. And finally, one last piece of news. Antonio Maria Costa, who was the head of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, said, quote unquote, the only liquid investment capital available to some banks on the brink of collapse in 2008 came from the profits of drug cartels and organized crime. So let's see, let me see his another direct quote. Okay, he said, quote unquote, in many instances, the money from drugs was the only liquid investment capital. In the second half of 2008, liquidity was the banking system's main problem, and hence liquid capital became an important factor. He said, interbank loans were funded by money that originated from the drugs trade and other illegal activities. There were signs that some banks were rescued that way in 2008. So again, when you think about it, the drug cartels are not altruistic. They're not humanitarian. They're not providing this liquidity to save the banks. There's something in it for the banks as well. So this, like I said, it's a symbiotic relationship, and banks aren't taking the risk to launder this money without gaining profits. And as I said, that the anecdotal information I've heard from being on the inside of banks way back when was that the banks will charge these drug cartels 30 to 40% to launder this money for them. So it's it's probably one of the most lucrative high margin businesses that banks can operate. So when you think about Pablo Escobar in his heyday, his net worth was estimated $3 billion. So think about the hundreds of millions of dollars that he's laundering through these big international banks every year. Because he's not you have to remember that the drug trade is 100% cash business. Pablo Escobar is not keeping $100 billion of cash in his home. So he's got to launder all this money through big international banks. Think about, what's his name, El Chapo Guzman, who's the head of the Mexican Sinaloa cartel right now. And all the hundreds of millions of dollars of illicit money in cash that he has to launder through some big international bank out there. And again, it's not speculation because there's already plenty of documented evidence that's come out, regarding Citigroup laundering drug money, HSBC laundering drug money, Wachovia Bank laundering drug money. So again, I just want to emphasize to everyone out there that banking is perhaps the dirtiest legitimate business on the face of this planet. And until we clean this up, I know that most of the news out there has been revolving just around deceit, mortgage fraud. Wells Fargo's been in the news recently for the U.S. government wanted to prosecute 10 plus years of mortgage fraud, enacted or executed by Wells Fargo. Of course, Goldman Sachs has always been in the news. JP Morgan's always been in the news for deceit and fraud and whatnot. But, the one thing that's overlooked that is going on daily is how much money. Remember that the one author of that book estimated that $21 to $32 trillion of dirty money is being laundered through these offshore havens facilitated by the biggest international banks in the world. So keep that in mind. And lastly, before I go, I want to encourage you to, if you're watching this on YouTube, to please comment below. Also, please hit the like button if you like the topic, and send us comments for what other topics you'd like me to address in future videos. Okay, so that's it for today, and until next time, take care, have a great day. So long.